dairy industry saw a real disturbance in the supply chain back at the start of the pandemic. Turn on the news and you'd see one article about how farmers are frustrated because they have to dump milk. And then you go to the dairy case in the grocery store with your mask on, and there's no milk in the dairy case.
Hi there. Thanks for tuning in to Future Foodcast, where thought leaders in today's food industry discuss the trends and technology that will shape the future of food. Today, we are speaking with Alex Walsh from Northeast Dairy Food Association. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for being here and providing your valuable feedbacks. So, Alex, it's great to have you on the show. Would you mind sharing with our guests what do you do at Northeast Dairy Food Association? It could be like your job title and any other information or context that you think might be relevant to our listeners.
Absolutely. So I'm the Associate Vice President for Regulatory Affairs for Northeast Dairy Foods Association. I handle all of our government relations and all of our lobbying aspects and components for the association. I also oversee all the communications for the association as well. Northeast Dairy Foods Association is a regional association. It's a trade group for the industry. We represent dairy processors, manufacturers, distributors, and suppliers in the Northeast United States. Our territory encompasses all of New York, New Jersey, and all the 6 New England states. So a lot of people, when I tell them I work for Northeast Dairy Foods, assume I'm out there milking cows, and that's not what I do whatsoever. We represent companies that process milk, that turn that milk into ice cream, butter, yogurt, other cultured products, cheese, and all the other manufacturers for dairy products that you see on the shelves. We also represent distributors, and as well as we have a suppliers association as well that we oversee. And those companies include everybody and anybody that provides goods, services to the dairy foods industry, and they include financial advisors, insurance companies, packaging equipment, you name it. They can all be part of our suppliers association. We have about 200 members in the Northeast United States that are members of the suppliers association. And we have about 70 or so members in the Dairy Foods Association.
So one of the things, when I see, your role as a regulatory affair, is that also called like government affair, wherein basically you represent all these associations and, represent it with the government, right?
Yeah. So, my job more focuses on the government relations side. That's pretty much the sole purpose of our trade association. While we do have other benefits of being a member of the association, whether it's cost savings programs or networking events, contact information for other companies, we provide a lot of other member benefits if you're a member. But really our number one priority for the association is lobbying and government relations. So my job is to focus on monitoring issues, pending bills, legislation, things like that. They come up in mostly at the state level, but we do monitor regional and national issues as well. So, my job is to focus on monitoring those issues and then reaching out to the appropriate legislators or government agencies, whether that's USDA or Ag and Markets for a state or labor departments, you name it. We kind of serve as the liaison for our members to the government.
I imagine that your role as a leader in regulatory affairs, you follow news about the food industry, tech and trends. Which trend is one of the most interest to you and why?
So one of the top issues that has really surfaced over the past year, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 2 years or so, has been the extended producer responsibility, recycling content, and when our trade association was first formed almost 100 years ago, back in the 1920s, actually. Really, the government relations probably focused more on the pricing of milk, you know, some of the issues that manufacturers or processors were facing as far as obtaining milk dealer licensing, things like that. Since then, our association has grown, and so has the industry. And we've seen that we need to have a broader focus on not just milk and dairy, but we've expanded that to agriculture. We've expanded that to the general business climate as well. And one thing that's really come up, like I said, has been this extended producer responsibility and some of the recycling content that's been happening in several states throughout the Northeast, but across the country as well. Some legislators or some states are, leaning towards shifting some of that responsibility off of government and onto business. And from our standpoint, we understand where they're coming from, but we need a little give and take on it. There's a lot of issues revolving around that topic. There's a lot of obstacles and hurdles to overcome before there's really a system in place that we feel comfortable with. But frankly, the infrastructure just isn't there nationally, even at the state level to take on this issue right now. But it's good that states are looking into it, and from our standpoint, the industry sees that this is the direction that a lot of governments are heading, and it's a major trend I think that we'll see across the United States in the next few years.
Great. So the next question I think is also pretty much going to build up on that. Which is one of the biggest challenges you see, maybe in your company or the industry that you work in. What's the challenge you believe is kind of you're facing today, and how do you think this will evolve or change in the future?
Yeah, that's a big question, and it's certainly something I think about probably every night before I go to sleep. Is what are the big issues that we are facing as an industry, and like I said, they go beyond obtaining milk and the pricing of milk. Just the general business climate, I think, is really been the biggest challenge for our industry. You take a look at a state like New York, it's very diverse, it's very large. You compare it to a state like Connecticut or Rhode Island, that's a lot smaller in population and a lot smaller geographically. They have different views and different obstacles and challenges that they're facing. But with New York, you have the North Country that borders Canada, very rural parts of the state, where even broadband access is difficult in obtaining. And then you have the city of New York, the largest metropolitan area in the world. And it's such a diverse state, and that all translates into just the general business climate of New York. And our association is faced with fighting some of these initiatives that have been coming down from Albany that have really are not in the best business context. And they're going to impact food processors, food manufacturers. They're going to impact retailers, your grocery stores. They're going to impact consumers. They're also going to impact the farming side of the house. So we really try to focus on making New York and all the other states a much more business-friendly climate, and it's a very big challenge. But we certainly give it our all every day to fight for our members and make sure we're on the front lines looking out for their best interests.
Great. One other thing. So I think you mentioned that you mostly operate from New York, but what other locations are your farms? What do you call it, right? Or the locations where you conduct the business?
Yeah, so our members which are processors, manufacturers, they have plant operations in New York, New Jersey, and all the New England states. So you got Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, and I think that's it. But so we're in 8 states all in total. So the 6 New England states, New York, and New Jersey. We do actually have a couple members that have operations in Pennsylvania, and we also have members that have plants that may be located in New York or throughout the Northeast, but also trickle down into some of the mid-Atlantic states, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia area.
Interesting. So that's interesting. So, let's talk about a little bit about, your work in the food industry. Now let's put your consumer hat on, and as a food consumer, what is important to you, and when it comes to the food you eat?
Yeah, so I didn't grow up in the dairy industry, and I never, growing up or even in college or starting my career, never envisioned myself working in the dairy industry. And here I am. I've been with Northeast Dairy Foods for a few years now, but it's really made me take a harder look at food and where it's made or how it's made, and the different brands and the different pricing and things like that. So when I go to a grocery store, my wife's always kind of dragging me away from the dairy case, because I'm always sitting there looking at all the different milks or the cheese, yogurt, things like that. But it's been interesting, because now I really sit and compare and look at some of the different companies that are out there, different products that are out there. Milk isn't just milk anymore. I mean, there's different kinds of milk. There's lactose-free milk. There's, it used to be just whole skim 1-2%. Now there's A1 milk, A2 milk, lactose-free milk, and then you have, like I'm sure we'll get into later, but some of the competing beverages that are against milk that we're competing against, such as almond beverages or coconut beverages, juices. In addition to the sodas and the sports drinks and other soft drinks that you see. So as a consumer, I'm much more aware of what's going on in the food industry and what's impacting retailers and what's impacting food processors, not just in dairy, but in other sectors of the industry as well. Our association works very closely with some of the beef and cattle and vegetable growers and the fruit growers, and you name it. And I always like to make sure that our refrigerator does have an ample supply of milk, cheese, yogurt to support our industry.
Great. So as coming from outside, I wonder. So I think dairy is the industry you're working. But what are some of the byproducts in this industry? What are the product lines that your company manages?
Yeah, so we have your traditional companies that take in raw milk from the farm and process it, bottle it, and put it right on the shelf, and you have your standard milks. We also have companies out there that are taking in raw milk and they turn it into cheese or butter, yogurt, ice cream, and then we have some of the other class products. So in dairy, there's 4 classes. Federal classes of milk products, or dairy products, I should say. Class 1 being milk. Class 2 would be anything you eat with a spoon, with ice cream and yogurt. Class 3 is cheese, and then class 4 is kind of all your other products, which includes butter or powder products. So, powder products has been one that's really escalated over the last few years. You see it being shipped a lot more. It's the products that you see put in the mac and cheese cups or baby formula, things like that.
Interesting. And you in terms of the market, the market, it's also all United States, or you also export some of these products abroad?
Yeah, we have members that, they're a little mom and pop shop and, serve ice cream or milk to, really their local community, their town, village, county, whatever. And then we have, multinational companies that are part of our association as well. And they're shipping dairy products to Canada, Mexico, China, Europe. It's really an international industry.
Interesting. And also in terms of, so that's export, and how about the import model? I mean, I'm sure some of these companies might also be importing some essential raw materials, which, for this industry, right? Is
yeah. That? So the raw material in dairy products would be raw milk, right? And
raw milk, yeah.
So that really doesn't get imported because statistically, if you look whether you're in upstate New York or you're in California, Wisconsin, Texas, anywhere in the United States, Canada, or in the world, really the best way to source your milk is to get it from as local as possible. A lot of our companies really source their milk from within 100 miles of a plant location. But there is imports that do come in from Canada, Mexico, from Europe, just as we're importing or exporting products as well.
This brings us to a very interesting topic now about the supply chain. So when people talk about transparency in the supply chain, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so the dairy supply chain it's really unique because a lot of people might just go to the grocery store, after work because they're out of milk. They go in, they go to the dairy case, pick up their milk, and they leave. But they really don't understand all the steps that happened before it got to the dairy case. And it starts at the farm, obviously, from a cow, or and other products. They have goat products or other mammals that it comes from. But starts at a farm. It then goes to a processing facility. From there, it either is processed into milk or can go to a manufacturing facility. Some of the manufacturing facilities process it there on site. And then it could go to a distribution center from there, or it could go, right to a retailer from there. So there's a lot of steps in between the dairy case and the cow of the supply chain in the dairy industry. And I'm not sure if we'll get into this later, but the dairy industry saw a real disturbance in the supply chain back at the start of the pandemic, especially up here in the United States and in the Northeast in particular. New York is one of the largest dairy states in the nation, in the top 5. You could sign on to almost any local news website or turn on the news, and you'd see one article about how farmers are frustrated because they have to dump milk. And then you go to the dairy case in the grocery store with your mask on, and there's no milk in the dairy case. So where was the disconnect? We have farmers dumping raw milk, but there's empty dairy cases in the grocery store. So that was a very big supply chain issue that happened at the start of the pandemic. And luckily it got rectified within a couple of weeks with the assistance of USDA, with the assistance of some of the state governments as well, and a little from just the natural trend of the market. But really what happened was everybody was shut down, starting working from home. All of a sudden, sales of dairy increased. Everybody's buying more cheese, yogurt, and milk to stock up at home because they're working from home now. One of those items on hand. So processors started producing as much and manufacturing as much as they could. And then there was a backlog. So they kept saying from the producers or the farmers to get as much milk as they could. And then all of a sudden processing facilities were at capacity. So now we have processing at capacity, pumping out as much as they can, but farmers are still producing as much milk as they can. So that's where the issue really came to head, was between the processors and the producers, was where you saw the dumping of raw milk.
Yeah, I see it like a demand and supply thing. Sometimes there's a lot of demand, but I think we may not have those checks and balances in place to understand basically what's happening. During this horizon, when we're going to see more demand or less demand, and based on that, we kind of made our own adjustments, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's certainly something. In fact, our association yesterday had a call with the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets and their economic development agency as well. And that this was one of the issues that we discussed. We hit on a little bit, and we're going to continue our conversations on. But it's really an issue that we need to be prepared for, or at least more prepared for in the future. Hopefully we never have another pandemic, but should there ever be some sort of disruption in the market, that not only are processors, but producers, retailers, and government agencies really prepared to handle this issue.
Right. One of the issue in the supply chain, mostly, that's been noticed is lack of visibility, from the start to the end, throughout the supply chain, I mean, things kind of get in at the start, and then we don't know, throughout the chain. It's basically very hard to track and, find out exactly what it is. So that's one of the areas where you see there's always challenges. Do you see something like those challenges where the companies kind of always complain that we don't have visibility uh, from the producers level, the farmers who have the cows and who are producing the raw milk to the consumer level, right? Is there enough visibility? Do you think any innovation? Are we having enough innovation in that area to kind of have a more visibility on it?
I think we're doing well in that aspect. I think we could do better. This has been an issue that's been going on for the last few years as well. And in fact, food fraud is becoming a hot topic. And because a company puts something on a label doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And so, I can speak for our members that, they take the utmost responsibility and care for their products to transparent as much as they can on such a small label, and and for what's required of them as well. Governments have been, cracking down on what's needed and what needs to be displayed on labels, and that's been part of the trend you see too. Is consumers are looking at saying, well, where is my food coming from? And luckily in dairy, I think we have a story to tell from dairy, that it comes from your local farmer. It goes to a processing plant that's, within an hour away from the grocery store that you picked it up, versus, we'll call it, product X soda that could have been just, water plus whatever flavoring and sugars and everything else that goes into making a soda. And it was made in Missouri, or it was made in Colorado and then shipped to Maine. That's not a story for me anyways. Dairy has that nice story of you're helping the local farmer, by buying milk and producing, or buying a dairy product. So, but the transparency has really been a big issue. And in fact, a few years ago, I was at a meeting where they were discussing food fraud, and I think it was olive oil is actually the number one food product out there right now that has the most food fraud associated with it. I'd have to go back and look, or you could certainly do some more research on that, but I'm pretty sure it was olive oil. But with dairy, luckily, I think we have, for the most part, very limited amount of things that go into the dairy product. Certainly cheese, or some of the yogurts, ice cream, things like that have more things that are added in to make the final product. But it all really goes back to making sure that companies, the processors, the manufacturers are doing their due diligence, making sure that they're doing what they need to do to ensure that the products they're buying that are going to go into the final product are coming from a reputable company, from a reputable source. And luckily, we also here in the United States have a lot of inspections and audits and government checks and balances that go into ensuring that food is safe and healthy for our consumers.
Alex, now you may also have access to some of these analytics, some of the data out there, about the consumers, right? Basically what consumers are looking for in some of these products, right? So what are some of the top things that you see that that certainly needs like immediate attention, that consumers are looking for? I mean, be it messaging of the product, be it the nutritional factors of the product, or be any health related aspect that the consumers want to see. So what are some of the things you wanted to highlight?
Yeah. Certainly I think the nutritional aspect has been a hot topic, and we've seen over the last few years how important nutrition is in everyone's diet. And I think that's been an increasing awareness campaign, and you may look at the United States and say, well, you have a high obesity rate, but I think for the most part, a lot of Americans try to take better care of themselves and make sure that they're eating healthy and the right products, and not having McDonald's for dinner and Taco Bell for lunch and Burger King for breakfast. It's I think they try to have as healthy products as they can, and certainly dairy provides a lot of healthy and nutritious aspects that you need: calcium, vitamins every day, and that sort of thing. So certainly nutrition has been a growing trend to make sure, and it's translated into a lot of the marketing campaigns and messaging from companies saying that, drink your milk and, have a yogurt, or, add cheese, or what have you, to ensure that you're obtaining the nutrients that your body needs. And so that's really been a growing trend over the last few years as well.
So do you have any interest or exposure to emerging technologies? What is the industry looking into it? How they see, these emerging technologies. I don't want to name any specific technology per se, but, in terms of innovation, in terms of putting the right technology and kind of having a complete visibility, end to end, how do they see this? And are we doing enough at this point? Or, you see that this is the time that change will start happening because of the pandemic and, all the issues that we are seeing, be it like the labor shortage, or be it, the lack of trust maybe, among consumers. So what do you see on that? And how is government seeing that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, because the innovation that I think that has really been on the forefront for the dairy industry relates to labor. And you may not associate labor with technology, but the last maybe 10 years or so, it's been a challenge for the dairy industry to attract and retain qualified employees. And a lot of it has to do with, I think, a generational gap. I think there's also been the push over the last 20 years or so, that when you're in school, you graduate high school and you move on to college, you get your 4-year degree, and then you work your way to that white collar job. And now we're seeing that these blue collar jobs are going unfilled, and it's proving to be very difficult to sustain our economy without some of these blue collar jobs. And that's been very evident in the dairy industry itself. So, I think we're going to be seeing, if this labor shortage continues, which has only been really highlighted by the pandemic, that we're going to see more automation. If these jobs don't go unfilled, there's still the demand from the consumer that they want milk, they want cheese, they want yogurt. And so our companies need to still meet that demand. But if there's not the labor there to meet that demand, they're going to have to shift their operations to continue to meet that demand. And the only really way to do that is through automation. And we've seen that in the dairy industry over the last 50 years or so, with automatic fillers, with assembly production lines, things like that. And you've seen less and less laborers on plant floors. So with the pandemic, especially, that's been heightened, that our companies now in the dairy industry are really having a hard time finding employees to work some of these shifts. And again, the thing about the dairy industry, you and I are, when it hits 5 o'clock, we're going to turn off the lights and leave and go home for the night. In the dairy industry, that doesn't happen, because just because the farmer turns the light off in the barn at night doesn't mean that the cow stops producing milk, right? That's a 365-day job. There's no weekends, there's no holidays in the dairy industry, so they say. And so our industry really needs to continue to meet the demands of the consumers. And the only way we can do that and sustain the industry is by automation. So we're going to start seeing, I think, more and more companies in the industry turn towards automation and those sorts of technologies that can help alleviate the labor shortage issue that they're seeing.
You know what? One of the interesting thing I keep hearing is that especially in the field of e-commerce or online, buying, they say that there's a data that says that, in last 2 months or in last couple of months, there has been, we made like a big jump, a massive jump into innovations, what we would have made in last 10 years. So I think this pandemic in a way, gave us opportunity to look into things, beyond like few years and kind of having that visibility for the next like 5-10 years, right? So I mean, in terms of the dairy industry, I don't know, in terms of innovation and automation and technological innovation, how it was in the past, but now do you see like it's more fast track now? There's a lot of interest among the in the industry to kind of certainly innovate and make their processes more foolproof and more like having visibility on each processes so that you know we can kind of meet up the demand. So
Yes, and a couple of things on that is that when you turn to automation, in a sense, you remove that human aspect of the production out of it. So when certain products require certain temperatures or certain amounts of different flavorings or different things that has to go into the final product, really automation almost is perfect at fulfilling those requirements versus humans, which may end up turning into errors or mistakes, things like that. So I think that we are going to see more trends towards automation because of just the human aspect of it. And our, like I said earlier, our industry used to really just focus on milk, and as time has gone on, we've broadened that scope larger and larger and larger to a more business environment and more business attention. And really, just because we have a company that's processing milk and that's their business, at the end of the day, they're still a business, and they still need to meet bottom lines, and they still need to cut costs, and they still need to make a profit. And if that's the way that they're going to have to do it to make profits, that's the way they're going to have to do it, because that's what a capitalistic society lives in, right? And that's what their goal is to make money. Not to sound insensitive, but at the end of the day, they're still a business, and they have to make a business decision that's going to make the most sense for them.
are there any developments in your industry that you think are making an impact on the industry as a whole? It could be the regulations, or it could be any new innovation that's going on that potentially we see that there's going to be a impact in next like 3 to 5 years. You wanted to build up on that?
Yeah, I'll kind of frame it as an analogy of Ford versus Chevy, right? It's the kind of the dairy industry against sports drinks. It's the dairy industry against sodas. It's the dairy industry against other snacks and food items. And while it's a competitive in nature, we kind of also feed off of each other. When Ford comes out with a new model or a new technology in one of their vehicles, Chevy's not far behind to come up with something similar or something better or something different. And I think that that's very true in the food industry as well. A few years back, we saw the innovation of coconut beverages and soy beverages and all the other juices that may label themselves as milk that are not milk, and they don't come from a lactating mammal. But so in response to that, the dairy industry then had to shift focus and say, how do we compete against those industries? How do we compete against those beverages? So that's when you kind of started seeing, well, we have lactose-free milk. We have all these other different milks now that have different levels of proteins in them that may agree with your digestive system a little bit differently or a little bit better, or things like that. So, the non-fat milks or non-fat cheese, non-fat yogurts, Greek yogurt, different, Now we have yogurts with fruit in them. We have ice creams that have wine in them. We have ice cream that has liquor in them. And in fact, in New York, special legislation had to be passed in order for a company in New York to produce and manufacture wine ice cream. They wanted to make ice cream that had an infusion of wine in it, but at the time it wasn't legal. It wasn't illegal to do, but it wasn't legal to do at the same sense. So our association brought this to the state legislature, and they passed a bill and became law that allowed ice cream to be made with wine. And then not far behind became wine ice cream that had liquor in it and things like that. So those are some of the innovative and new creative, I say, responses that the dairy industry has come out with over the last few years. And I think that we're going to continue to see those. And then that's in response to some of the other beverages that or food or snack items that, put their twist on something. And so we compete against each other, but we feed off of each other in the same sense to really enhance everything that's going on in the grocery store. And I'm sure if you asked, my grandfather, who was a dairy farmer, way back when, who's now in his late 80s, but if you asked him, 70 years ago, hey, Grandpa, have you ever heard of wine ice cream, or have you ever heard of lactose-free milk? And he's lactose-free milk. How does that happen? Or those things were never heard of before. And those are the creative resolutions and creative takes that the dairy industry has really worked on over the last few years.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I have I've lived in Europe for some time, and I have heard about the wine candies, but I never heard about the wine ice cream. So that certainly is something new. Probably that might be there already, but it's something I never came across.
Yeah.
But that's I think yeah, it's interesting that based on the customer likes and the demand and what the consumer is interested in, industry is kind of trying out new things. So how does that work? Whenever we try something new like this, in terms of getting the market feedback or the consumer feedback, how's the feedback for some of these new things that we try? Is it?
Yeah, it's been
wine.
Yeah, it's been really successful, and in fact, our member that's manufacturing the wine ice cream, it's really a small operation up in upstate New York, but they're doing really well for themselves. So I think you may even see that translate into other companies starting to come out with some sort of ice cream that's along those lines. And we have other ice cream manufacturers as well that have come out and take their creative spin on things, whether it's associating something with a sports team or a TV show or something in pop culture that's going on. And it's all really just a way to attract the consumer, right? And whether that's a new consumer or maintaining the current consumers you have, or just building on getting new consumers as well. That it's really exciting in the dairy industry that you never think of these things, but when you're working in the dairy industry every day, you start noticing these things more and more, and really how those types of trends and technologies that have come out really in the end benefit the consumers by providing more opportunities in the grocery store for us, and really can either be great for your health or beneficial, provide just different options for your palate, whatever the case may be. But in turn, it's really helped maintain and help keep the dairy industry not only relevant, but successful and sustainable.
Any new regulation or anything that's kind of pending, or anything that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I can kind of maybe touch on a couple of things, but I think over the next few years, and what really general consumers, or even those that may be associated with food processing in some capacity, may not realize what happens in the dairy industry. One thing I always tell people is how, if you're familiar with the United States government structure, there's an agency called ATF. It's Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms. And a lot of people consider that the most regulated industries in the United States. And I would consider milk and being right behind alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, because the amount of government that's involved in the dairy industry is really unbelievable. And you'd be surprised at how, some of our members have, how many inspections they have to go through monthly, quarterly, and yearly, on how much engagement they have with inspectors and with government agencies. And they have to, have milk dealer licenses, and they have to have certifications and different things, and they have to meet all these other criteria that's set by the government. And things like the Farm Bill, which approved every 5 years in the United States. And those are all things that impact the dairy industry, and then in turn impact consumers, because things like, if the Farm Bill is not passed or signed, providing funding for producers, or allowing for certain innovation, or other things that processors are looking for, it may end up resulting in increasing costs on processors, right? So what's that going to do? That actually leaves less room for payments to go to producers, which in turn hurts the farmers. It may also increase prices of the products, and in turn that hurts the consumers. And then that puts us at a disadvantage, and a competitive disadvantage against all the other products, because, well, Coca-Cola or Gatorade, all those products maintain their pricing, but they're not regulated like the dairy industry is. And so now the price of milk has gone up, the price of cheese, yogurt, ice cream, butter, powder products, all those prices may have gone up. And now we're starting to see the dairy industry as a whole start to have more difficulties, right? And it's just like a milk. If you ever seen a milking stool, it's a very small stool that farmers used to, sit on while they were milking a cow. And there's usually 3 legs of a milking stool, and one represents the processor, one represents the producer, and one represents the retailer. And sometimes there's that 4th leg that, represents the consumer. And you really need all 4 of those legs to make a balanced stool. And you really need all 4 of those components to make a balanced economy when it comes to the dairy industry. So there's, a lot that's going to be happening from, different pricing that goes on and how that's regulated throughout the United States. That's a very complicated and convoluted topic itself. It's based on formulas out of Wisconsin, and then your radius away from Wisconsin depends on which federal milk marketing order you fall in, and then what the price of milk is that you can charge. And then there's certain federal milk orders that have minimum pricing. There's certain milk orders that have maximum pricing that's the most you can sell a gallon of milk for. So and those are things that the general consumer doesn't understand or know about. And it's fine, because they don't need to know, but in context, that's where the dairy industry comes from, and that's what the dairy industry has to go through, in addition to making sure that their operations are all functioning properly, so you get that end product. But we also have to deal with all the regulatory issues that are going on in the world. So there's certainly a lot. And like I said at the start, we're fighting against things like gasoline taxes. We're fighting things against recycling content issues. And it's not that we may be opposed to some of these things, but I think that we need to do it at a time where our economy can sustain it and really be able to implement these things. Not in the middle or towards the end of a pandemic, when we're basically just getting back to normalcy, sort of, maybe, hopefully. Every day is different still, but it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few years.
Alex, one of the things I think I forgot to ask was, and I think it just fell through the cracks, was about the sustainability. Like packaging and all. I think that's one of the the really significant things these days because of the plastic. We're talking about plastic bans, and we're talking about recyclable packagings and all that. How the dairy industry is looking at it, and what sort of revolution you see into the packaging of the dairy products?
Yeah, that's been a huge topic over the last couple of years. And, one thing I can say is that the dairy industry really has been pro sustainability, pro recycling, pro environment. So our industry really has been working with and trying to be on the forefront of these issues, and tries to be a leader on these issues as well. I think some of the challenges that either I discussed earlier that the industry is seeing is that maybe some of the timeframes that some of the governments may be placing on their states or locations, whatever, on some of these recycling topics or constraints may not be feasible with the dairy industry or some of our members. So that's where our challenges are. But it's a few months ago I saw Labatt Blue, one of the beer products in the United States, is now going to be packaging some of their 6-pack cans with biodegradable plastic, not plastic, but biodegradable wrap around them. So, and I found that fascinating. Had I not been in the food processing industry, I don't think I would have taken a second look at the article. But being in the food processing industry that I am, in my role, I found that really interesting. That's where the food and beverage industry as a whole, outside of dairy, just as a whole, is heading. So I think that we will see more and more innovative technologies and solutions to being more sustainable and more friendly for the environment, and more economically friendly as well for our members in the dairy industry as well. So we'll start seeing more and more of that, I think, over the next few years for sure.
That's great. So I think, Alex, we pretty much covered everything. Anything you believe I might have not touched base, or I think you already done that, but anything you believe you just want to put in the sound bite so that it would be valuable for our listeners?
Not any real topics I can think of. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on, and thank you guys for having me. It's been a real pleasure to speak about these topics and the impacts that the dairy industry is facing today, and looking at tomorrow's challenges as well. And I think we really need to come together, not only as the dairy industry, but an agriculture industry and as a food processing industry, to look at these obstacles or challenges and how we can overcome them, and how we can move in further into the future and be sustainable and friendly for the environment, and have the best business practices possible, as well as still producing and processing the best end products for the consumers.
Yeah, I think for that matter, I think this future foodcast, podcast is really going to be very valuable, because certainly we are interviewing industry experts and kind of getting their feedback, their thought process, and their vision, for what's coming in next few years. So I think, this is going to be really, really very valuable for consumers also. And I think it's not going to maybe solve any purpose, but at least it will give us insight about, what some of the things that we are dealing day to day. And I hope it will, solve some of the challenges that we are facing today.
Yeah. There's certainly a lot of challenges that we face, and if some of them could be solved, that all the better. But I think even just the exposure of some of these issues or challenges that the dairy industry is facing right now, I think can hopefully either trigger a couple light bulbs on people, or just make them realize some of the challenges that we're facing, and understand where the industry is right now.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.